Welcome to week 2 of our series. It's within you. Today's topic is what do we do about it. So we're working through the book that I showed you last week, called It's Within You, by Rabbi Aryeh, Weinstein and Ilene, Cohen. So just to begin with a bit of a review from last week, and I want to expand on a couple of points and then get into today's discussion. So the essence of what we spoke about last week is what he begins the book with, is a concept we've talked about many times, which is how do we live our lives essentially? What is the foundation of our lives? Is it an outside-in model or an inside-out model? Right? Meaning, how do we want to be valued? In other words, every person needs to have self-worth. As explained last week, it's a need that every person is to be valued, to feel worthy, to feel that there's some value and intrinsic worthiness. But the question is, how do we create that and where do we get it from? So the question was, do we get it externally or internally, right? And this journey is, as we explained, is the core foundation of everything. All the symptoms, and impacts everything else. It impacts ourselves, impacts other people, impacts our relationships, and therefore it's worth having a look at that very core essence and foundational perspective of how do we look at ourselves and where do we gain our worthiness from. And I gave you the analogy of the chicken last week, the story of the chicken, where you can clean each feather out separately, but if the chicken gives a big shake and shakes everything off, that becomes clean. That's the concept. In other words, if the paradigm shifts, it's an internal shift, right? So, just to review what this actually means in essence, so we explained that the fundamental, as we just said, the fundamental need of every human being is to have a self-worth, or to feel worthy. But the problem is that there's two ways of doing it. So, this is how we define it. So when it comes from the outside, that means we get our worthiness from what other people think, or the external parts of who we are. And then the outside is creating my sense of value. Right? The result of that is ego, insecurity, because we're always trying to fight for the approval of the outside, or even the external of ourselves, the superficiality of ourselves. And that's a stressful life. Whereas the proper way of doing it, is, which we're working on, is within. Within means that it is actually acknowledging the intrinsic value, meaning it's not that the outside it creates my value, it's my intrinsic value that actually creates the outside reality. So the way I look at things, my perspective, the way I look at the whole world outside of me is based on the intrinsic value that I have. The result of that, of course, is humility. The result is less focus on self, actually. But the less focus on self, because we're not obsessed with self, gives us the opportunity to go beyond ourselves, as we explained last week, which is to explore meaning, explore purpose, and so on and so forth. So essentially, it becomes a choice. It becomes a choice between, because it is a choice. It's a hard choice sometimes, because it's a lot of thinking, a lot of perspective. But it becomes a choice between insecurity or security. It becomes a choice between emptiness, shallowness versus purpose. In other words, when everything is defined by the outside, then our life becomes shallow, because everything is about not depth. It's not about deeper meaning. It's about that approval from the outside. Whereas if we work from inside, intrinsic value, intrinsic worthiness, our focus becomes more what is our intrinsic value doing to impact the outside, and therefore it's a life of meaning and purpose rather than emptiness. And also it becomes a choice between stress and calmness. As we explained last week, that lots of stress comes from within. In other words, how we look at stuff. It's how we freak out because what other people might think or say or do or perceive, and so on and so forth. And that all has to do with the Lech Lecha model that we talked about last week, which is last week's parsha, which is God essentially telling Abraham that it's now time to move inwards. Lech Lecha, that Lech Lecha means go for yourself, but really the word Lecha means to yourself. So it's God telling Abraham to go within yourself, discover your intrinsic self, connect with your intrinsic soul. That soul, which is really our intrinsic worth, and that's how we define it. The intrinsic value of every human being is that spark of godliness at the very depth of our soul, which is eternal, which is unchangeable, which never changes, it's always pure, and is permanent. Which is also why at the end of last week we explained that really from a Jewish perspective, the only way to really do this, and the only way to really develop this and connect to this intrinsic value that we have is to bring God into the picture, because that fact, that concept, that spark of worthiness within ourselves is eternal and unchangeable, is really because it's godly. And God is eternal and unchangeable. Okay. Before we get into today's discussion, I want to just expand on this a little bit. It doesn't do this in the book, there's just an additional thought that I wanted to share with you, of this concept making such a difference in so many things, particularly on how sometimes we describe success, even spiritual success, even good success. And I want to share with you two thoughts. One is actually on this coming week's parasha. When we read about Abraham's hospitality, right? So we find a very interesting thing. I just actually saw this idea on a little video that someone was sharing around, which was in Yiddish. This guy in Israel gives these little videos out, and he shared a very nice idea. And it really is to the heart of what we're talking about, I think. So we find a very interesting thing in this week's parasha. We find two mentions, or two descriptions, of Abraham's hospitality. Now we know that Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham, was incredibly hospitable. He was kind to the core, to the point that in this week's parasha, when he was recuperating from his 99-year-old surgery of circumcision, it's surgery. It might not be such serious surgery on an 8-year-old, but on a 99-year-old it's pretty serious. He was sitting outside the door of the tent. God had intentionally made it a very hot day so the wayfarers wouldn't be traveling, so he shouldn't be bothered. He didn't like that. He was pained by that, and therefore God sent him 3 guests. But those 3 guests, as we know, were in fact angels. They weren't really people. The simple reading of the Chumash, there's very different ways to read it, but the simple reading of it is they didn't know they were angels, initially at least. He thought they were 3 wayfarers. In fact, he thought they were even pagan worshippers, but he was hospitable to them anyway. And he ran out to greet them and asked them, begged them to come in and eat a meal. Now, that story of that hospitality is told in great detail. And the Torah kind of praises and emphasizes Abraham's tremendous effort that he put into it. He was a person of such old age, and he was recuperating from surgery, and it was the 3rd day, and he was particularly weak, and yet he runs towards them. The pasuk emphasizes Vayaratz, he ran, and he begged them, and he said, please stay, and then he ran to Sarah and asked her to make bread, or matzahs, as some people say it was Pesach time. And he ran to the bakar, he ran to the cattle, and every time the Torah is adding this word running, because to show how enthusiastic and passionate he was, he runs and he goes and he gets 3 calves. Incidentally, if you're looking for a menu, or you want to know what the menu of those times was in terms of a delicacy, not everyone doesn't talk to everyone this, but he went to get 3 calves for 3 people because he wanted to serve each one tongue in mustard, according to the commentaries. Right? Remember, tongue is mustard. No one eats this anymore, but it's actually a very good food. Right? So anyway, so there's tremendous detail. Now we know we have a principle that the Torah doesn't say extra things. Right? Every word in the Chumash is measured. Every word in the Chumash is exact. Right? In fact, that's why we have an oral Torah, because so many things in the Torah are so brief and cryptic that we need the Talmud, we need the oral Torah to expand, to explain, to analyze, and so on. And yet here there's sufficient detail, because God obviously is emphasizing the tremendous hospitality of Abraham. Yet, later on, now, we have to understand, this hospitality that Abraham displayed at the end wasn't really hospitality. Because this tremendous meal that he cooked up with the 3 tongues and the matzahs and the milk and all the stuff that he put there, the whole menu, no one actually ate anything. Because they weren't people. Right? So, actually, it was for nothing, in a way, one could say. And yet there's this detail of how much he did it. Yet, later on in the parasha, where it talks about Abraham's actual hospitality, the fact that he was hospitable to everyone, all human beings, there's one sentence that describes it. And the sentence is cryptic and doesn't go into detail. The sentence says, Vayita Eishel bi Be'er Sheva, that he moved to Be'er Sheva. As we know, Avraham Avinu lived in Be'er Sheva for a while. And he planted an Eishel. Literally, Eishel means a tree. But the rabbis explained to us that Eishel actually is an acronym. The word Eishel, Aleph, Shin, Lamed. Eishel is an acronym for Achila, Shtiya, and Lina. Eating, drinking, and sleeping. He opened up an inn, he opened up a B&B. Right? so that people should have where to stay and eat. No detail, no description of how enthusiastic he was about it, just a simple thing. So here, when Abraham goes to such lengths for amazing hospitality, which actually doesn't land up in tremendous success at all, there's this unbelievable description. And here later on, when it talks about how he actually was hospitable, we have a lot of midrashim that expanded it and extrapolate and sort of expand on the whole idea. But in the Chumash itself, it just says a little bit. It just says one sentence. So he said a very fundamental concept, and I think it has to do with what we're talking about. Because the Torah wants to teach us a lesson of how we define success. What happens if a person, and often this happens to us, how if a person sincerely puts in the effort and tries and does the right thing and it doesn't work? It doesn't work. The Torah says that that's irrelevant, that it doesn't work. Because that's success. In any way, success. God said, the outcome of your effort, leave it to me. I'll decide. But your effort has to be doing the moral thing. You have to be doing the right thing. You have to be enthusiastic about it. Abraham sees three people that he thinks are people. He throws himself into the hospitality at great effort, with great pain and great work. And Hashem says, that's amazing. That's amazing. Abraham could have felt so bad the next day. He could have said, listen, I went to all this effort. I ran. I shechted cattle. I brought bread. I did the whole thing. At the end, I found out that's angels. They didn't even eat anything. Right? Could have felt guilty the next day. Could have felt really let down. Could have felt like, so what's, as we always do sometimes, what's it all worth? If you put in so much effort, nothing happened. They didn't, I invited, they came, they didn't come, they didn't want, whatever, right? Hashem says, no, that's not true. Now, why is it not true? Now, we need to define this, right? Because one shouldn't confuse this with another principle. Judaism particularly is not a religion of effort, actually it's a religion of action, right? A person can say, well, I really meant well. I wanted to put a mezuzah on my door, but I didn't, right? Or I wanted to give charity, but I didn't. I just didn't get around to it, but I really wanted to. My heart was in it, right? Or I really wanted to put up, do the right thing, but I just didn't bother to make sure that it was done right. That's not good enough. In other words, when we talk about effort putting into doing the right thing. In other words, the effort must be action focused, of course. And Avraham Avinu's his efforts was to really be hospitable. It was arranging a meal to feed someone who he perceived to be a traveler, or some people who he perceived to be travelers, right? So obviously we always have to try and move towards the goal of action, that's for sure, because at the end of the day, particularly in Judaism, it's a religion of action, the outcome is important. But when we say the outcome is important, is that I have to be focused on the outcome. How well I actually get to the outcome, that's God's business. So later on, when we talk about the fact that Avraham Avinu supplied and he provided for so many wayfarers by building an inn, by building a hotel, that's wonderful, and it happened. It's fantastic. But where do we see Avraham Avinu's real hospitality? In the story of the angels. Even though the action didn't actually happen. But we see his real hospitality. Where do we see his passion, his enthusiasm, his devotion, his dedication? In the story of the angels. Because that's where he ran and he tried and he was old and he was weak and so on and so forth. And he still went for it. Now why is it like that? Why am I bringing this in? Because it's so connected to what we're talking about. Often we feel let down, or we feel guilty, or we feel deflated when our efforts don't actually land in the outcome or the success of the outcome that we wanted to. Why? Because we're measuring success externally. That's still got to do the same thing. We measure success about what happens on the outside. So if I put in tremendous effort and then it doesn't actually work, so you, the onlooker, will say, well, that was a failure. God says, no, I don't measure it that way. I measure it with what inside out, with what you did. In other words, the success is what you did, and the ramifications of that success is beyond us. We'll never know what the ramifications of that success is. Or even if we do know, and it doesn't seem to be any ramifications, it doesn't make a difference. Our job, our mission in this world is to live a life of meaning and purpose. Life of meaning and purpose means we put everything we can into breeding and creating meaning and purpose. If the meaning and purpose doesn't quite turn out the way we thought it was supposed to turn out, that's not our business. That's God runs the show. We, from the inside, have to give life meaning and purpose. We have to try and reach those outcomes that God has guided us with and inspired us with to reach those outcomes. But how we reach them and how successful it is, or it appears to be on the outside, that's not the point. That's a hard thing to do because it's very difficult to actually live by this. But it's such an important concept. So when I heard this idea, I thought it's actually connected to something else. A very fascinating Hanukkah law. Now, we're not quite there, but Hanukkah is around the corner. It's in, I don't know, it's in about 6 weeks, roughly, right? So I was thinking about this because I happened to be studying with someone the laws of Hanukkah, so we were talking about the mitzvah of Hanukkah. So there's a very fascinating law in the laws of Hanukkah, right? So just to summarize the mitzvah of Hanukkah, Hanukkah is not just a symbolic thing, it's actually a mitzvah every single night to light the candles, and so on. So there's a preferred time to light the candles. If not, you light them later on at night when the family's still up. And then there's a length of time that the candles is supposed to burn for. Either candles or oil, whatever you light with. But you're supposed to light them in such a way that it burns at least for a half an hour into the night. If you light it later on at the night, so you're supposed to light them, at least they should burn for half an hour, right? That's the... I'm not going to go into the intricacies of how we derive this and what this is based on. Essentially, just very, very briefly, it's based on the Talmudic idea that the purpose of Hanukkah candles is what we call Persume Nisa. It's the publicity of the miracle. And in ancient times, people still walked in the street. In fact, in ancient times, Hanukkah candles used to be lit in the street. All right? Not so much today. In Israel, they still do it a bit, but they used to be lit in people's doors facing the street. People didn't really walk the streets at night, except for, which Thomas is very interesting, there was one particular community that they would still be found in the streets half an hour into the night, and therefore the Hanukkah candles were supposed to burn for half an hour into the night. Just parenthetically, just a very interesting thing, it's the 7-Eleven model, business model. What I mean, after hours model, because the Talmud tells us, what were people, in those days people didn't go in the streets at all at night. They used to work during the day and didn't have Christie, so night would come, they'd all go home and that was it, they'd stay at home. Right? They would study, they would socialize, they would eat, whatever they would do. But generally people didn't go out at night, right? So much so, there's a lot of stuff in the Talmud about not going out alone at night and it's not safe and so on and so forth. So why was the half an hour? Why were people still in the street? So Hanukkah in the northern hemisphere is in the winter, right? So there was a community called the Tarmudoi that came up with a business model. And the business model was that they knew everyone goes home at night, and the first thing they do is they want to light a fire. First they want to light wicks for light, but also it was cold. So they light a fire. Many people go home, not everyone's organized. They come home, they're about to light a fire, and they see they're out of wood. So where are they going to get wood at this time of the day? So they came up with a business model. They would hang around for another half an hour in the street to sell wood to people who were out of wood. So bottom line is they were still roaming the streets for half an hour into nightfall, and therefore the Hanukkah candles are supposed to burn for half an hour, and then the halacha is, the law is, if you light them later, they should burn for half an hour. In the Gemara, the Talmud comes with this fascinating law. It says like this, that when you light the Hanukkah candles, right, the mitzvah is to light the candles. What happens if 5 minutes after you light the candles, something happens, I don't know, a chair falls over, or something happens, an unexpected wind comes through the window, and the candles go out, right? Are you obligated to relight them because they haven't burnt the half an hour yet, right? There's a dispute in the Talmud about this, and the halacha is that no, you don't have to relight them. Now the custom is yes to relight them if it's weekday, not Shabbat, because we want the kind of candles to burn as much as possible, but there's no obligation. You have to light the candles, the mitzvah is to light them. If they go out, they go out. Don't worry about it. Again, as I say, the custom is we would do it anyways, but you don't have to. Yet at the same time, although the mitzvah is to light the candle, right? But you only fulfill the mitzvah if you had enough oil or enough wax to last a half an hour. So it's an interesting thing. You have to make enough oil to last a half an hour, yet if it doesn't actually burn the half an hour, it goes out, it's okay. Right? So I was giving the shiur to a few people the other night, and we were learning this section in the Talmud. So one says to me, that's ridiculous, that doesn't make sense. Either the mitzvah is to burn for half an hour, or the mitzvah is just to light a candle. If it doesn't have to burn for half an hour, so then just light a candle that has wax to burn for 2 minutes. If you need oil to burn for half an hour, so it should burn for the half an hour. And I was thinking about it, it's a good question, right? So I'm sure there are many answers, halachic answers, but the answer I was thinking of ties into this concept. It's the same lesson as Akavram Avinu. You have to do what you can. It's the outcome on the outside is not always that relevant. Now it depends. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that we apply this to all cases, because like if someone put a mezuzah and they discovered it wasn't kosher, no, you actually have to take it down and go buy another one, right? But at least there's a lesson here. The lesson is you have to work whatever you can towards the outcome from the inside. Therefore, you want to do a mitzvah of Hanukkah candles, you need to put enough oil so that it should burn for half an hour. However, in the end, if you lit the candle and some external reason it did not burn for half an hour, you're okay. But if you didn't put the oil there in the first place, then it's not okay. Because you have to do whatever you can for it to work. Avraham Avinu did whatever he could for it to work. What happens on the outside is not always that relevant. So therefore, even if it goes out, you still did what you can. Now that only works if it's an inside-out model. It only works if you measure your success not by what happens on the external, but what happens from the inside. And by the way, this is true, as I said last week. Not only external meaning outside of me versus me, but it's also true when we talk about the external of me versus the inside of me. So we multi-layered, as we said, right? We have our external layers, our behavior, our emotion, our intellect, and so on and so forth. And that's how we measure success, but it's not how we measure success. Because measure success is not the outcome and the outer layers. Measure success comes from what I tried from the very inside. So for example, we have this principle, a clear principle, which is specifically with regard to the mitzvah of studying Torah, right? Now, when a person has to try and study Torah at the highest level, we are taught. But we are taught that if a person masters volumes of Talmud, for example, right, at a very, very high academic level, versus the guy that learned the same amount of time with the same amount of effort, just didn't have the intellectual capacity to master that level of Talmud at the same level, the mitzvah is identical. Right? Why? Because success isn't measured of how much you understand. Success is measured how much you put into it. Right? And it's the same idea. Now, what you put into it means I've got to come from the very depth of who I am, which means I've got to use that depth to nurture my outside layers, but it's got to come from inside. That's the main thing. Therefore, if someone has the capacity to master volumes and doesn't, that's also a problem because he's not utilizing the talents that God gave him. But the success is about the desire to use whatever God gave me. That the success comes from the inside. For some person, it might mean actualizing a lot of academia. For some person, it might mean different. But because the success is not coming from the academic level, it's coming from the inside, from the depth of the soul. That depth of the soul then has to actualize the potential on all external levels. But the mitzvah will be identical. Sorry, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's still looking at it from outside in, if you accept that you aren't given the capability to learn Talmud like the person next to you, that affects your self-worth, even if it's not an out from Hashem, like you weren't given that ability, so your self-worth can still be affected from an inside-out model.
That's if you identify yourself by that outside layer.
If you want that and you can't have it.
Yeah, in other words, that's me, but it's not me.
Right.
As we talked about many times. The me is not even the outside of me. It's certainly not the outside of me, but it's not even the outside in me. The me is my neshama, my me is the spark. And my job is just to take the layers that God gave every person different layers for different reasons, for different purposes. Right? Now, I mean, you've got to maximize it, and you can expand. We talked about it in the growth mindset. You could, with hard work, it could grow. I mean, we shouldn't accept the layer that we're given. We can accept that we can make it better, and we can improve it, but as much as we're able to. In other words, but that's not the sign of our success. And therefore, if I fail first, it's also okay. That concept. So it's a difficult thing because most human beings don't work like that. Most human beings do define themselves, even if they don't define themselves by the outside perception, they certainly define themselves by their own outside perception. Yeah. That's why this is so important. It's so difficult, but so liberating because it's. You know. And also, we never even know why it is like that. I mean, we never know the ramifications. There's a story I once heard of two yeshiva students who were sent by the Rebbe. It was a system that still goes on today, but there was a system the Rebbe started very, very early on in the 1950s, early 1950s, where he would send yeshiva students who would study all year, but during the summer, he would send them off to like remote areas in America to just knock on doors and inspire people, sell mezuzahs, sell some books, whatever the case is. Okay. So two of these students came back and wrote a very depressing letter to the Rebbe that said that it was a failure, the whole thing was a failure. That they went there, they couldn't find any Jews, they went out every single day, they went down the street, up the street, a couple people that knocked on the door weren't interested in seeing them, Other than that, they couldn't find anyone, and they didn't accomplish anything. They didn't give one person one mezuzah. They didn't inspire anyone with a good inspirational idea. They didn't find anyone. They were talking about, and they're reporting back, mission failed, right? So if anyone knows anything about the Rebbe's perspective, would know that wouldn't go down very well. And after a while, the Rebbe wrote back to them, and then later the Rebbe spoke about this publicly. And he said, first of all, it's not your business. Right? Exactly this point. That's not your business. Your business is to do what you have to do. Second of all, let me let you into a little secret. So the Rebbe said that he got afterwards communication from someone in that town that there was an older woman who was on a balcony, who was very, very down. She was a Holocaust survivor. The whole family had been wiped out. She didn't want to have anything to do with anything. And she happened to be, they didn't notice her, they didn't see her, they never got to her, but she noticed these two yeshiva students looking like yeshiva students walking down the street, and she became unbelievably inspired. She said, oh, it's still alive, people are still positive, people are still doing. And somehow she connected to the Rebbe. I don't know exactly the end of the story, but trying to figure out, you don't even know what she succeeded on. In other words, maybe your mission that summer, you always have to try to do what you need to do. Obviously, you have to try and meet as many people as you can, and you have to try and get to meet as many people. Obviously, you got to plan for what we call success. But it's not your business. If it comes from inside, that's not how you measure and define success. Because you never know. Your mission that summer might have been just to inspire this woman. Maybe that's what you were sent to the sick town for, just to inspire that particular person. So we don't know. And then for the same thing, the person doesn't have such a deep intellectual capacity. The person who does, his role or her role is to be able to teach and to share and to master a very, very high level. The person who can't still has to try for that. And has to do as best they can with a lot of effort and investment. But you never know what your mission is. Maybe your mission is to inspire someone else with your effort, or whatever. You never know what your mission is. So we don't know. But that's only possible. We can only accept that perspective if we come from the inside rather than from the outside. Okay. Now, once we understand this idea, right, that we developed last week and just expanded on it now, so how do we get there? How do we change, right? How do we actually switch our thinking? Because it's very difficult. Most of us don't do this. Most of us by default either live a life where we define our success by the perception of others outside of us, or at least define our success from the outside layers within ourselves, right? So how do we behave inside out rather than outside in? So we need to revisit something we once spoke about. You see, last week I said that when we embark on a journey of spiritual growth, we should not look only at the symptoms, we should go to the foundation, which is exactly what we just did, right? In other words, rather than look at the symptoms of what goes wrong in our journey, we should look at what's the foundation, what's behind everything. What's behind a lot of how we operate and experience and are effective or positive is this concept of how we define it, living a life inside out rather than outside in. However, when we develop the perspective, it's a very big difference between developing the perspective and actually feeling that perspective. So we can say 10 times, or we can go to 10 shiurim where we talk about the concept of living inside out, and yet we still get bothered when someone criticizes us. So we still get bothered when what we did didn't look as successful to other people as it should have looked, right? That's a fact. So what do we do about feeling it? What do we do about actually experiencing it? What do we do about really living our life that way? That we start to actually live from within and defining all levels of success and self-worth from inside out rather than outside in. So in order to do that, we have to remember a concept we once spoke about, and that is like this. Once we've developed the perspective, now it's time to turn to the symptoms. Why? Because I've explained to you many times that we have 3 layers of conscious existence. There's 3 layers of conscious functionality. The way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act. Okay? The most difficult one to change is the way we feel. Right? Most of how we perceive things, most of how we define things has nothing to do with how we think, it's got to do with how we feel. Emotional. Right? So we have a principle, action changes things. That's not how it's written in Jewish literature, but similar concept, right? It's a concept which was first written by someone called the Sefer HaChinuch, and he writes, Achrei HaMa'asim nimshach HaLevavot, that the heart follows the action. Meaning when we behave in a particular way, we start to feel that way. Particularly if the thinking is already straight. You follow? In other words, the way to do it, this is true in lots of things, by the way. The way to start feeling a particular way is to act that way. But not act the way in a shallow sort of fake way. It's to act that way because we really think that way. It's just we don't feel it yet. So what we need to do is to skip the layer of emotion and engage in the behavior. Make the behavior consistent with our mind. And then the heart gets sandwiched in the middle and starts to change. Does that make sense? Right? Yes?
That's the concept of change the thought, change the behaviour, change the feeling.
Change the thought first, change the behavior second, then change the feeling. Correct.
And then you speak.
And then the feeling changes, actually. More than change it unconsciously, right? Now, we have other ways of changing feelings. I mean, part of it is, we've talked about before, the idea that which we talk about when we talk about the three layers of intellect, called Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat. That when you conceive a concept and you understand it, then Dat, which means you really internalize and you think about it a lot and you repeat it and you really absorb it and you try to apply it in your mind, the more you think about it, the more it will become part of who you are, the more it will affect your feeling. That's also one way of doing it. But a very good way of doing it also is then to look at what are the behaviors that would be consistent with your thought process and then engage in those behaviors, right? Or, put it a bit differently, what are the behaviors that are inconsistent with the way we're thinking, and stay away from those behaviors, right? Both are true. In other words, yeah?
Often what goes on, from my understanding, is that we're running this on an unconscious level. And that's the difficulty.
Okay, we once spoke about this. Let's leave that for now, because we once spoke about that. Of course, in order to think straight, you also have to a little bit enter into the subconscious, the unconscious, and deal with getting rid of the ego. But that's okay. But in other words, we're working on we predicate on the idea that a person really wants to live a life of meaning and purpose, right? Which is taking care of the ego already. Well, he wants to take care of the ego, which is a subconscious thing. But let's leave that for now. So, step one, therefore, is to understand this idea that we need to live inside out. To understand how shallow and empty it is to create success and define worthiness and value from the outside. To understand the value of the essence of who we are, the spark of the soul. To understand that our self-worth, we all have intrinsic value, we all have intrinsic worth, the purity of the heart, and so on and so forth, right? Step one. But once we have that straight, now we have to go to the details. Now we have to look at behaviors and see what are the behaviors that are consistent with that, what are the behaviors that are inconsistent with that. Stay away from the behaviors that are inconsistent and engage in behaviors that are consistent. So I'm going to share with you a number of different things over the next few weeks, but today I want to share with you something that Rabbi Weinstein in this book actually highlights, which is an interesting thing. And he says like this. He says, one of the things that people engage in a lot in different ways, if we think about it, and it's a symptom of living outside in rather than inside out, is what he calls hiding, right? It's a tactic that we subconsciously use to get a sense of worthiness from others, because we're trying to get worthiness from others, right? And sometimes what we think is, if we hide a part of ourselves, in other words, like this, if our sense of worth comes from making a good impression on you, but I know at least subconsciously that the whole of me is not so good, right? So therefore what I do, I need to hide that part and only show you the part that works, which is essentially lying, right? So he calls it hiding, right? It's a very bad tactic, but we all do it all the time. And he gives like a couple of very simple examples. So for example, someone who calls their spouse and says, I'm going to be home in 15 minutes. When you know you're not going to be home in 15 minutes, right? You know it's going to take at least 45 minutes. But you're scared to say that, because you're scared to make the other person angry. What are they going to think of us? I promised them I'd be on time. Now I'm just called from the office saying, no, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Right? It's not going to happen in 15 minutes, right? Or for example, you're scared to enter into confrontation with someone. Someone did something that you really don't think is okay, right? And you say, no, it's absolutely fine. Why? Because you don't want them to think badly of you. You don't want to have a confrontation. You don't want them to think that you're a confrontational person, and so on. Now, it's good not to be a confrontational person. Don't get me wrong, but not through dishonesty necessarily, right? Or when someone asks you what something that you have costs, and you say it costs more than it really did, right? Or you say to someone, you over flatter someone, you say to someone how wonderful and amazing their meal was, or their presentation was, when actually you don't think so at all, right? Now I have to just put something in there now. I was going to say it later, but let me say it now, right? So I'm going to talk about not lying and not hiding, but rather being honest. Being honest doesn't mean being tactless. That's a confusion that many people make. It's a very fine line, exactly, right? I'm not encouraging being tactless, okay? Which is connected, by the way, to a very, very good Yiddish saying. We talk about the importance of being truthful and being honest and always saying the truth, etc., etc. There's a beautiful Yiddish saying I'll say it in Yiddish first, and then I'll translate it. It says, "Man darf nicht sagen kann liegen," which means, "Man darf nicht sagen kann liegen," you're not allowed to say a lie, aber man darf nicht allemal sagen the ganze emes, but you don't always have to say the whole truth, right? And there are people like that, by the way. There are people that are saying, no, you got to say the truth, you got to let them have it, you got to tell them, right? Not effective, right? So that's not what I'm talking about, right? We have to be tactful people, we have to live with other people, we have to make sure people feel valued, not only that we feel valued, right? But there's a very big difference between being tactless and being dishonest. It's two separate things, right? Being angry, for example, exploding when someone criticizes you is the same thing, right? So let's say someone suggests to you, a relative, a friend, a spouse, whatever the case is, right? That the way you did something was wrong and you should do it differently, right? And we explode because none of us like criticism. Why are we doing that? It's also a form of hiding, right? Because we don't want to confront the issue, we don't want to confront the part of it. Maybe the way they said it wasn't so nice, but maybe what they said is actually right. But we don't want to confront that. We don't want to confront that maybe I did make a mistake, or maybe I didn't make a mistake. Let me think about it honestly, right? But no, I right away feel threatened and I want to sort of protect that part of myself, so I get angry. Now, of course, getting angry is not effective. It doesn't actually get approval from other people anyway. But it's a form of hiding. It's a form of not being completely present. In other words, there's a very big difference between... So let me just clarify this. In other words, let's say someone says something to you, right? And you lose your temper. The difference between that and saying, can we discuss this civilly and respectfully, is discussing it properly and respectfully means I'm completely here. I hear what you say. I fully absorb your message. I'm thinking about it. Can we have a dialogue? That's being present in a relationship. Losing our temper, which we often do, or saying hurtful things back, or whatever the case is a form of rejection, saying, no, I don't want to be completely present. I want to keep part of myself. I want to protect part of myself. It's saying, I'm just going to push you away, which I'll do with some mechanism called anger or passive resistance, or whatever the case is, and I'm protecting myself, right? It's all part of the same thing, really.
Rabbi, isn't it when we're reactive that it's actually something in us that we need to look at?
Well, that's part of it, being not be present, because
And
we're not...
that's why.
So hold on with that. So let's see. So what he says is an interesting thing. He says that this is particularly relevant, first of all, for ourselves, right? Because what it means is this concept of hiding. When we engage in hiding type behavior, right? What we're really doing is we're strengthening this notion that approval, worthiness comes from the outside, right? Now, just as we know that good behavior or good feelings are generated from actions, so when we engage in action, it changes the heart, right? That's what we said. So, achrei ma'asim nimshach halevavot. But it works both ways. It works positively and negatively, right? So the more we engage for ourselves, right? The more we engage in behavior which is hiding, using hiding tactics, we're strengthening our own perception and our own feeling, no matter how much we might have learned the opposite in our mind. But if we engage in behavior which is protecting ourselves, protecting our insecurities, or behaving in an insecure way, we're enforcing the feeling, and we're enforcing the very strong feeling that a sense of worthiness comes from the outside, right? Which is very detrimental for our own development, because at the end of the day, no matter how much we learn, no matter how many books we read, no matter how many discussions we hear, no matter how much even we've understood it and absorbed it in our mind, if we don't behave in the behaviors which are consistent with the mind, we send the heart in a different direction, and the heart is always stronger than the mind. Clearly, right? Which is why this is a really amazing strategy in terms of changing, right? Emotions are always stronger than intellect. So if we act in ways which is outside in, even though we say we believe in the inside out model, but we don't do anything to behave that way, we're only going to strengthen the feeling of outside in rather than inside out. And we'll just continue to escalate that behavior, right? Which is, by the way, a model for self-change in general. Because often when people, and this is a question I've had lots of times, often when we talk about something that we know is right, and it sounds overwhelming, say, no, I can't get there. So first of all, the answer is we don't need to get there. We need to move towards there. Very, very important aspect in all forms of personal growth and self-development. We don't need to get anywhere. We need to move towards where we have to get, right? That's number one. But what we also need to learn is this, that any form of self-development or personal growth, we first have to get the concept right. When you get the concept right, concepts, you don't talk in detail. Concept, you talk in totality. What's the foundation of the concept? What does this mean? So we talk about this idea. This idea is that we need to understand that our intrinsic value comes from inside. We need to live an inside-out life rather than an outside-in life. And so that's a very total, global idea, holistic idea. And then we think to ourselves, but I don't know if I can live like that constantly. The answer is we probably can't. We just have to move towards there, right? But moving towards there means, if we want to chip it away at our feelings, we can change our mind completely, but the feeling takes a long time to change, right? But changing the feeling, we need to do step by step. How do we do that? By identifying some behaviors that are inconsistent with that mindset and committing to changing those behaviors, right? So if we don't do anything about it and we continue hiding, as he calls it, that's one aspect of this process, then we just enforce the heart in the wrong direction, and then it becomes very, very hard to apply that principle that we had in our mind, right? But besides being detrimental for ourselves, it's very detrimental in relationships, the way we relate to other people. It has a negative effect on other people, and it has a negative effect on how we relate to other people. Because you see, the strength and the power of relationships is two people connecting with each other completely. And that's why they talk about being present in a relationship. Being present means not just being there physically or doing some things in the relationship. Being in a relationship means you are who you are, but you're fully there. You can fully listen, you can fully connect, you can fully give, you can fully take, right? To be in a relationship means you're fully there. That's what a true relationship means. Hiding in a relationship pushes the other person away. Because people pick up if we're fully there or not, right? So, in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, we are taught, we talked about this before, Knei lecha chaver. Knei lecha chaver means acquire for yourself a friend. It emphasizes the importance of friendships, right? And we've talked about this before, how come in Ethics of the Fathers it says the word chaver, singular, one friend. Why? Because a true friend is someone you fully connect to. A true friend is someone you fully trust, right? You can fully connect to. And that can be one friend sometimes. That's okay. But trusting is a two-way street. Connection, presence is a two-way street. If you want people to trust us, or if we want to trust them, it has to go both ways. And to fully trust means you have to be fully present. Right? And he says a very beautiful line, which I'm going to read to you. He says, it's got nothing to do with charisma, it's got to do with presence. And he says like this. He says the opposite of hiding, just to use his words because they're beautiful words. He says the opposite of hiding is showing up. To show up in a relationship, to show up fully. He says hiding equals seeking. If you hide, you keep looking and you don't find. Because the more you hide, the more you distance the other person away. Showing up equals finding. And he says like this, he says, it's got nothing to do with charisma. He says, because charismatic people, he says, presence is far more powerful than charisma. Charismatic people can draw others to them, but unless they're truly showing up, the relationship will be shallow and short-lived, right? You find this so often in life. It's amazing how sometimes people will show up in your life and they're amazingly charismatic, and we get almost fooled or swept by that charisma, and the relationship actually is short-lived. Why? Because there's no relationship there. Charisma is an external thing. It helps. It can be effective sometimes if you want to achieve certain things, but it doesn't create a relationship. It might create a movement, but it doesn't create a relationship. Relationship is about showing up, right? And therefore, the detail, the symptom, the one behavior that he says that we should address in order to start living in a way which at least is consistent with the concept of inside out, is getting rid of this hiding idea. Showing up rather than hiding. And it gives a couple of examples, right? There we are. Sorry, I should have put that. Okay. There I'll put it. Be honest, not tactless, right? So he says, what are the hiding tactics that people use? First of all, one is lying. So dishonesty. Okay. So honesty, again, honesty doesn't mean tactless, be tactless. Honesty means honest, right? So we're someone says to you, it has to do, for example, with just generally, like being honest. We know that honesty breeds trust. Why? Because honesty is all me. And sometimes honesty means being a little bit vulnerable. Now we need to define that. Vulnerability in relationships actually works. People actually like people who are vulnerable. Like if you listen to speak and they're a bit sort of vulnerable or good. Why? Because you feel you're getting the whole picture. Now, vulnerable doesn't mean to bear everything open. Privacy is a very big thing in Jewish thought. It's not necessarily that when you meet someone for the first time, you tell them your whole life story and all your weaknesses and all your failings and everything that ever happened to you from the day you were born till now, right? That's actually unwise. That's not wise at all, right? Pirkei Avot tells us that the good thing for the person is silence. You don't have to overtalk. It's not a good thing, right? But at the same time, when you're overemphasizing hiding your own failings or hiding your own weaknesses or creating a perception that when you talk about things you've reached them that's a very, very bad thing. Now, what's interesting is that today in our modern, he doesn't talk about this, but today in our modern society, this has become out of control. Why has it become out of control? Because social media, one of the things that's caused it to become out of control is that social media has created a completely artificial and superficial level of relationships because they've created a perfect world. And that's why the stress that it's caused by people going on social media and seeing everyone else living, so to speak, perfect lives, or looking perfect, or acting perfect, or having perfect family structures, and perfect children, and perfect cousins, and perfect dogs, perfect everything, right? Is untrue, it's dishonest, and it's extremely stressful. And it's taking away people's self-worth because people think that's what life is all about. There's studies out now about it. This is unquestionable, right? This is not some Jewish thought I'm telling you from 1,000 years ago. Which is also unquestionable and true and everything. But right? But I'm saying this is now being. It's no. Stress levels are up, anxiety is up, everything's up. Why? In very, very young children, it's going lower and lower with time as time goes about. We know this. There are kids now as young as 6 or 7 that are showing up with anxiety symptoms, real anxiety symptoms. So even younger, yeah. Why? Part of it has to do with this false world that social media helped create. Now again, social media has some wonderful things to it. I use it all the time. But, right? That's how I get a lot of people to come to certain events. But at the same time, we need to know its dangers. Because it's going exactly the opposite direction of this, right? We don't have to present as perfect. Now, we don't have to present as perfect if we don't believe perfection is important. Some people believe perfection is important because they live an outside-in model. They want to get their approval from people from the outside. Or from their own outside. Being a little bit vulnerable and being honest about, I'm talking to you about this, but I'm not perfect either. And I do this sometimes too, without bearing your whole soul, right? Is very, very powerful. So lying is a hiding tactic. Honesty, particularly in relationships, is so important. And relationship I don't mean only with a spouse. Relationship means with any type of relationship. Because it builds trust, it creates presence, and it builds real connection. Right? Exaggerating, minimizing, right? People do this all the time, often just to create an impression. We don't need to over-exaggerate. We don't need to over-minimize. We need to be honest, right? It goes both ways, by the way, because it's sometimes the insecurity shows up in so many different ways. Someone will tell you, "Wow, you look really good today," or "Your meal was really good." "Oh no, it wasn't. It was really bad, and I just woke up on the wrong side, and normally it's a lot better." No, thank you. Just thank you. It's good. Or you say you did something and you just overbuild. Just honesty. Part of it is it. Flattering, the Talmud talks a lot about flattering. Flattering is considered a very, very bad thing. Flattering goes into the whole concept of praise. It's good to compliment other people. It's good to praise other people, but it's always got to be appropriate. Because it's good to lift other people up, but not in a false way. Because flattery is kind of a thing where you're looking for approval. I'm thinking you're going to be so pleased with me because I'm going to overshower with you with praise. But at the end of the day, people see through that. It means I'm not completely there. I'm not showing you what I really believe. I'm not being honest. Why don't we just find the good in people? Let's focus on the good. Let's not focus on the negative. That's true. But praise people and kids and people and friends appropriately, in an appropriate way, in a nice way. Honest way, right? The same thing goes the other way around. People seek praise. We seek praise, we seek gratitude. Now, gratitude is a very, very important thing. But when people seek gratitude and they make their giving hinging, we spoke about this last time, right? And they make their giving dependent on gratitude. If I give someone a present, I'll do someone a favor, and then you say, you couldn't even pick up the phone to thank me. Oh, that's interesting. So you did the favor to give gratitude, right? That's a problem. Now, we all do that, and we do feel a bit hurt, because it's nice to know that other people are a mensch. But at the same time, we have to do what's right? We have to do the right thing. We don't need to give gratitude. I've had this discussion in many ways with lots of people. When people are in relationships, they can tell you, the more, as much I do for that person, they're never going to be happy. That might be true. Sometimes someone very close. But you have to do what's right. You have to work out what are your boundaries. You have to look what's the right and moral thing to do, and do it. If you get a thank you, you get a thank you. It's nice, beautiful. We all like to get thank you. If you don't get a thank you, it's also good because I've done the right thing. Why? That's about coming from the inside. Right? Again. If I only do it because I need your thank you, I need your approval, I need your gratitude. Again, we should give gratitude. We should show gratitude because it strengthens people. We all need some measure of gratitude, right? We're not talking about this in extreme, but at the same time, we also need to focus on doing what's right, even if we don't get that gratitude, because it's got to come from the inside. It's all part of showing up. It's all part of being completely present, doing something from within, doing something with the whole of me, not just part of me that wants the outside recognition, but doing something with the whole part of me coming from the inside. And of course, the other part is victimhood. Right? Victimhood is a very, very important one because in relationships where sometimes the mechanism of hiding actually expresses itself in victimhood. Why? Because what do we do with victimhood? We make ourselves all pity. I'm always making mistakes, so therefore we're looking for a different type of recognition. We're looking for people to have rahmanas in us, to be compassionate to us, right? Instead of being a little bit honest. Yeah, I understand it is hard. I'm working through it. I didn't realize that. You don't have to be a victim. Just being honest. It's difficult. I'm working through it. It's part of being present, part of being whole. So these are just some of the things. So the point of what we're saying is, and we're going to take this a different direction next week, right? The point of this is that we don't have to, we develop this idea of living from inside out. We can't live like that completely right away, but we can move towards that. The way we move towards that is by identifying some of the behaviors. One of them is the concept of hiding. If we can all reflect and see in our lives some of the cases where we do hide, and we all do it on some level, somewhere, and try and improve that, try to be a bit more honest with ourselves, more honest with other people, show up more and be more present, being more honest, not tactless, that's a step towards engaging in behavior that turns our feeling more to understand and appreciate the value of living inside out rather than outside in. We'll take it, develop more next week. Have a wonderful week.